Good morning and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. This is the Fast Friday edition of the show for October 9th, 2020. And on this episode, I'm talking about centralization of power, or what the founders regularly called consolidation. And I'm going to share with you 7 primary reasons, or 7 categories of reasons, as to why centralization leads to a destruction of liberty. And for that, I'm going to Brutus, one of the leading anti-federalist writers of the day. First of all, before getting to that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. Our show homepage is where you can find everything you need to follow this program. You can find all the archives, all the platforms, video and audio-only podcast editions, all the social media channels we're on. Even in individual episodes, I include links for you to read all the stuff that I'm referencing and learn more on your own time, and even our membership program where you can support us for as little as $2 a month, and we make it go a long way in support of the Constitution and liberty. All that and more on the show homepage, which is 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. It's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And I couldn't be more grateful for you spending some of your time with me today. Thank you so much for being here. Whether it's your first time or you've been here since day one, thank you so much. But since it's Fast Friday, I promise to not take up too much of your time. Let's see if I can get this done in the next 10 to 15 minutes. It's a lot of interesting information, though. And I want to start out, and you've probably seen these quotes, especially if you've watched this show or listened to it for a while. You've heard these at some point. But I want to set the stage with 2 quotes. First, from Thomas Jefferson. Here in an 1816 letter to Joseph C. Cabell, he put it this way: "What has destroyed liberty in every government which has ever existed? The generalizing and concentrating all cares and powers into one body." Or in the summer of 1788 at the Virginia Ratifying Convention, Patrick Henry gave speech after speech after speech where he was railing against consolidation. And he summed it up like this. He says, "Consolidation must end in the destruction of our liberties." And even those who weren't concerned that the proposed Constitution was going to lead to a lot of consolidation, or any at all, still considered consolidation dangerous. People like James Iredell, George Washington, James Madison, William Davey, many, many others. There was really no debate that consolidation was a problem. The only concern was whether it was too much or too little, or what needed to be done, somewhere the balance of things. But consolidation, everyone knew, was a problem. And there really wasn't an explanation as to why. Like, if you look at all these speeches by Henry, he wasn't explaining like, oh, consolidation is going to do this, 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 this. It was just understood. And that's why I think Brutus paper number 1 is so important. Now, they used to think it was Robert Yates who wrote this and did all the Brutus papers, but most historians think that's incorrect. It was most likely Melancton Smith or John Williams. All 3 of them are from New York. Maybe they all worked on it together. Who knows? And the person is less important than the information. So let's go to this section of Brutus paper number 1, which I will link to in the show notes. He cites Montesquieu, who he calls one of the greatest and wisest men to ever have thought or wrote on the science of government. All the founders actually respected and learned from Montesquieu. Here from Spirit of Laws, book number 8, Montesquieu writes, "It is natural to a republic to have only a small territory. Otherwise, it cannot long subsist. In a large republic, there are men of large fortunes and consequently of less moderation. There are trusts too great to be placed in any single subject. He has interest of his own. He soon begins to think that he may be happy, great, and glorious by oppressing his fellow citizens." He goes on, he says, "In a large republic, the public good is sacrificed to 1,000 views. It is subordinate to exceptions and depends on accidents." In other words, it's just going to be problematic all the time. But Brutus says we don't just have to look to the experts. We don't have to look through to the experience of history. He says this. He says there are still a variety of reasons that may be drawn from the reason and nature of things against this idea of an extensive republic. And here, the first of these 7 categories. The first one is, in every government, the will of the sovereign is law. Sovereignty is final authority. Brutus says, in despotic governments, the supreme authority being lodged in one, his will is law, and can be as easily expressed to a large, extensive territory as to a small one. So problem number one is that whether it's one person or a handful of people, its will becomes law. Number two, we're talking about representation. And he says, if you're talking about in a free government, the idea of having representatives means they can represent your interests. But here's the problem. He says, in a large extended country, it is impossible to have a representation possessing the sentiments and of integrity to declare the minds of the people without having it so numerous and unwieldy as to be subject in great measure to the inconveniency of a democratic government. So either you're going to have representatives who absolutely aren't representing people like we have today, because it's impossible because they have too many people that they're supposedly representing, or you have to have so many representatives that you're basically living in a democracy, and that has its own problems. So that's number two. They actually can't have representation. Number three, he says, in a republic, the manners, sentiments, and interests of the people should be similar. Why? And this is going to sound familiar, I think. If this be not the case, there will be a constant clashing of opinions. And that is exactly what we live under today. Constant clashing of opinions. Why? Because they want to run. I mean, when every decision is made by one far-off governing body, of course, it is going to be a life or death situation there. People are going to fight tooth or nail to control that institution. Brutus goes on. He says, the representatives of one part will be continually striving against those of the other. He talks about fighting and factions. And if that wasn't prophetic, I'm not sure what was. So that's number three. Number four, we're talking about standing armies. He says, in despotic governments, as well as in all the monarchies of Europe, standing armies are kept up to execute the commands of the prince or the magistrate, and are employed for this purpose when occasion requires. But they have always proved the destruction of liberty and are abhorrent to the spirit of a free republic. He says a free republic will never keep a standing army to execute its laws. It must depend upon the support of its system. But you can't have a system that gets the support of its citizens if you have this type of extensive republic, according to Brutus, where you can't have proper representation and on and on and on. And so you're always going to have this type of fighting and faction that has to be enforced through violence. Going on, the next one, he's talking about confidence. He says, confidence which the people have in their rulers in a free republic arises from their knowing them, from their being responsible to them for their conduct, and from the power they have of displacing them when they misbehave. Try voting the bums out, right? I mean, you don't get too many incumbents losing their job. So this has really been lost, certainly. He says the different parts of so extensive a country could not possibly be made acquainted with the conduct of their representatives, nor be informed of the reasons upon which measures were founded. He's talking about people in Georgia and New Hampshire. They could not know the way that they think or how their life is. And I often say the people of South Carolina shouldn't try to force their way on people here in Southern California and vice versa. And I'm not picking on South Carolina for any particular reason, but that's really the same type of thought that Brutus had here in paper number one. This was published October 18, 1787. What's the consequence of this, Brutus says? He says they will have no confidence in their legislature, suspect them of ambitious views, be jealous of every measure they adopt, and will not support the laws they pass. Hence, the government will be nerveless and inefficient, and no way will be left to render it otherwise but by establishing an armed force to execute the laws at the point of a bayonet, a government of all others the most to be dreaded. Again, it all ties together. And because of these type of situations, and because of the size and the power, you need violence and force, of in essence, some type of force, an armed force at the point of a bayonet or the barrel of a gun these days. The next one, number 6, he's talking about local concerns. He says, in a republic of such vast extent as the United States, the legislature cannot attend to the various concerns and wants of its different parts. It cannot be sufficiently numerous to be acquainted with the local condition and wants of the different districts. It's impossible. When you're representing so many people in such a large area, you can't understand what they need, what's best for them. And really what happens is you're really just dictating to them. And that's certainly what we have in so many areas today. Brutus goes on, he says, if it could, it is impossible it should have sufficient time to attend to and provide for all the variety of cases of this nature that would be continually arising. And the last one I think really ties it all together. We're talking about abuse of power. And he says, in so extensive a republic, the great officers of government would soon become above the control of the people and abuse their power to the purpose of aggrandizing themselves and oppressing them. Again, prophetic, wise, understanding history, understanding the nature of things. This is absolutely spot on. And he talks about how the power and trust given to these or committed to the people who are basically the officers of the country, things like commanding of all the troops, appointment of officers, power of pardoning, collecting the revenue, power of expending them. All this stuff, these are great powers. And he says, when these are attended with great honor and emolument, as they always will be in large states, so as greatly to interest men to pursue them and to be proper objects for ambitious and designing men. Power corrupts, and it also draws the people who are corrupt to exercise that power is really what he's getting at here. He says such men will ever be restless in their pursuit after them. This is the type of person it's going to draw to the center, the reins of power. And Brutus sums it up like this. He says they will use the power when they have acquired it to the purposes of gratifying their own interest and ambition. And it is scarcely possible in a very large republic to call them to account for their misconduct or to prevent their abuse of power. Well, this is really, really interesting stuff to me, and I think there's a lot of lessons for today, a lot of things that sound very familiar, and because of that, maybe we should look into what Brutus has to say a little bit more. There's a number of other papers. If you guys find this interesting and educational, you want me to do more episodes, somewhere down the line, won't be really fast, somewhere down the line on some of these other papers by Brutus or other related ones, please do let me know. The last few times I've covered any anti-federalists, I got a lot of great feedback, and that encouraged me to do this as well. So if you like this information, you like the show, you support the TAC, please take a few moments to do a few free and easy things to help us spread the word. Smash the like button, subscribe, leave a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or Podbean or whatever platform you're using to listen to the podcast. That helps out a ton. And of course, if you want to put your financial faith behind our work and support us with a little bit of cash, some fiat money, we're happy to take it. We're happy to use it to reach new people every single day with this message of the Constitution and liberty. That's 10thamendmentcenter.com/members, where our monthly membership program starts out as little as $2 a month. Please don't feel any obligation to join in, but if you can consider it, I'd be very grateful for any consideration you can give. Again, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you learned something. I hope it piqued your interest for something more. I appreciate you being here. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week here on the Path to Liberty.